Hello, Divine Code reading for February 21st, pages 517 and 518. We are in the chapter Precepts related to marriage, fornication, and divorce. Continuing in chapter 7, topic number 7. Topic 7 is dealing with the question of a minor daughter being given in marriage to a man by the father or by the family. It is the custom of certain nations, families, or clans that the father of the family or another relative decides for the woman whom she should be married, and then they force her to marry that man, with the woman having no choice to protect against marriage. This is contemptible and improper. Now, in yesterday's reading, it was understood that if the girl has the right to consent or to not consent in such a situation. So this is talking about a culture where the girl is not given the right to consent, and she's forced against her will. This is contemptible and improper. Nevertheless, once it is done and the woman is referred to by the man's wife, she is considered fully married, and another man who cohabits with her is liable if she is at least 12 years old. This appears to be correct from the law of a master who, it was in chapter 3, of a master who designates his slave woman as a wife for a slave man. And after the two slaves have begun living together with marital relations as a husband and wife, the master is liable for adultery if he cohabits with her. Even if the slave woman was forced into this type of marriage by her master, it is nevertheless considered a full marriage once the public recognizes it. That is, even if it is initially against her will, by default, it is assumed that she agrees after it is publicly known. Rabbi Zalman Camille Goldberg points out that this brings up a new rule that marriage can be considered binding, even though can be binding through the acknowledgement of society. If a man marries off his daughter, it is possible that the only reason she is considered marriage is because the father has full jurisdiction over his daughter. As we find, Rambam Laws of Slaves, chapter 9, that the father has the power to sell off his daughter into slavery, and he can also marry her off. This matter requires further deliberation. So there's still a question that's open. When it says matter requires further deliberation, there's still an open question that needs further study as to the girl that is married off by her father and she did not consent. Is she considered married solely through the societal understanding that she's married, and to just assume that she consented to it, or at some point she gives in to it? Or do we require that it have her consent in order to be considered a correct marriage, a full marriage? The author responds that this can only explain the case of a father selling his minor daughter, but the matter of being dealt here includes the marrying off of an adult daughter, for whom it applies. It appears that the father has no jurisdiction to sell her into slavery. So there's a question as to whether or not that if the father is within the Jewish law, there's the concept of the maidservant who is of an impoverished family. The father sells her to into servitude to a wealthier family, and the assumption is when she's of age, she'll either marry the master or the master's son. thus giving her a reasonable life that would not have been able to be provided by her family, by her own family. And that's within Jewish law. And the question is, how do we understand this within Gentile law, where we don't have this idea of the maidservant? And she would be required to consent to be married. Would that apply? Would her requirement to consent in such a case apply within Noahide law, within Gentile law? When it is clear the entire time that she cries and protests against the marriage, it is forbidden for her husband to force her to have relations. As long as she does not willfully, willingly consent to having relations with him, she is not a balut baal, completely married. Nevertheless, if and when she is silent and accepts and does not protest her marriage, even though she did not agree to it at first, then this is sufficient for her to be considered by all as his wife, to be fully married. So as long as she protests, the husband is not allowed to have relations with her. If she stops protesting, then it's understood that she's given her consent, even though it's consent that she really didn't agree to, but she's going along with the marriage. Then at that point, she would be considered married. And it needs to be understood that within Gentile law, and we're going to go into this later on, the woman may leave her husband and initiate a divorce. So she is, except the question is, what happens if we're in a society that does not follow that rule, where the woman does not have a choice in the matter? How does the Noahide law operate within a non-Noahide environment? It is allowed within Torah law. Topic number 8. I'm sorry. Topic number 8. It is allowed within Torah law for a Gentile man to marry multiple women if there is full public knowledge. If the courts decide to forbid polygamy and set boundaries on this, they have the ability to do so. And this was discussed earlier, that it appears that if a Gentile man violates his society's code of conduct that forbids polygamy by taking a second wife, the second wife is not considered binding and is therefore only licentiousness, and another man who cohabits with the second wife will not be liable for adultery. So again, this area is looking at difficult areas. The polygamy is allowed within Torah law. However, if the courts say it's not allowed, then we have to follow what the courts say in this regard. And the Jewish courts, a century ago or longer ago, at least in Europe, ruled that polygamy was not allowed, and therefore it was not allowed within the Jewish community. And likewise, in secular Western society, polygamy is generally not allowed, and therefore, if a man were to marry a second wife, that would not be considered a binding marriage. It would not be considered acceptable. Topic number 9. However, the woman may only be married to one man at a time. And if she becomes married to two men, she is considered married only to the first one that she had relations with for the purpose of marriage, and the second man is she and the second man is liable for capital sin of adultery. It is related to Torah sources that God considers marriage ceremony itself for one woman wedding an additional man to be repulsive. So you see free on Leviticus chapter 18, verse 3. So by Torah law, the man can have more than one wife. However, by Torah law, the woman can only have one husband. And anything beyond that would be considered adultery. Topic number 10. If a woman specifies herself for one man's cohabitation, but she is not considered fully married regarding the secular government's laws and assigned rights, such as in today's term they are only living together, she is still considered a concubine in the perspective of Torah law. This practice is permitted for Gentiles, and the woman is considered fully married if their shared home relationship is publicly known. If another Gentile man cohabits with her, both are liable for adultery. A necessary length of time has not been identified, but the deciding factor is that the couple who are living together are considered married when they are known publicly to be living together on a permanent basis in this manner as a husband and wife, and they are not embarrassed about this or trying to hide the fact. So if for some reason the couple decide not to get married according to the customs of the society, however, they are living together, they're cohabiting together on a permanent basis, that's considered to be like a marriage. It's considered a concubine status, and it's considered married according to Torah law for non-Jews. The Torah law authorities debated whether a Jewish man, other than the Jewish king, is permitted to have a Jewish concubine. See Rambam and Ravad, Laws of Marriage, Chapter 1, Shulchan Aruch Ebenezer, Chapter 26. According to Rambam, there and in Kings, Chapter 4, it is forbidden since she is not considered fully married. But for Gentiles, it is definitely permitted. So within the Jewish law, they have a whole system of what's considered married. And if people were just living together without going through that, they would have the status of a concubine. But a concubine within Jewish law is only considered proper for the king. And anybody else, it would be considered not proper. It would not have a marital status. We find in many areas of scripture that refer to concubines. See Genesis 22:24 and Rashi on Genesis 22:20. Rashi on Genesis 25:6 says that a concubine is a wife who receives no marriage document. See Ramban there that a concubine has no marital rights. The custom in biblical times was to provide a full wife with a long stipend and other contractual obligations upon the husband, but the woman who agreed to be married without such rights was called a concubine, a plishus in Hebrew. Likewise, a slave woman who is taken for marriage is considered as a concubine. The liability of a man who cohabits with another man's concubine is debatable. See Responsa on Ridvash 398, who deliberates about this. But the Parshas Devorkim, chapter 1, pages 7 and 20, explain that a Gentile concubine is a full wife in terms of adultery. And there is no difference in the Noahide commandments between a contractual full wife and a concubine. Only for a Jew is there a difference, since Jewish concubine is not accepted in marriage, nor is she married with a ceremony under a wedding canopy. This is the opinion of Rambam, who holds that where a master specifies his slave woman as a wife for a slave man, The slave man alone may have relations with her, but any other man would therefore be liable for doing so until the master publicly severs the relationship between his two slaves. Surely the same applies for a concubine who designates herself to a man. She is considered fully married woman with a Noahide code. So again, within the Jewish law, she would not be considered married. But within a Noahide law, she would be considered his wife according to Noahide law. Rashi on Sanhedrin 57a argues with the opinion followed by Rambam in regard to this designated slave woman, and holds that the transgression committed by another Gentile man who has relations with her is that he is stealing her, but not committing adultery, since a slave woman who has no official status of marriage. Still, it seems that Rashi would accept Rambam's opinion regarding a concubine, since she has a share in freely agreeing to the relationship, and therefore her free consent that gives her the status of a married woman. This is in contrast to a slave woman who has no consent in the matter because she was under the complete jurisdiction of her master. So again, it's the question, if we're dealing with slaves, then the woman's choice would not be a matter. If we're dealing with people living together as husband and wife, even if they're not according to the secular law, or they don't have a marriage contract, but yet they're behaving as husband and wife. In that case, in the case of people living together on a permanent basis, that would be considered married, according to Noahide law. And the question is rather how it applies to slaves, which does not really factor in normal Noahide concerns. Thank you.